Welcome to the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast, where we talk to doctors like you about their real-world lessons in financial matters and hear from industry experts who can impact your personal bottom line. The host of our podcast is David Mandell. David is an attorney, OJM Group partner, and author of more than a dozen books on wealth planning for physicians. You can find additional audio episodes from our first 4 seasons on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and other popular platforms. Now, let's turn the mic over to David.
Hello, this is David Mandell, host of the podcast. Thanks for joining us on, if you're listening on any of the podcast platforms or you're watching us on YouTube, thanks for joining us. I'm excited about today's episode. We've got 2 interesting guests, and I think the topic, negotiating and coming to an agreement on your contract as a physician is one that I think all the docs listening and watching will be interested in, because whether it happens often or a couple of times throughout your career, getting a good deal, making sure that you're well represented, making sure that you have your get the best deal you can, and be in a position where you feel like you're getting value for what you're bringing is extremely important. And I think a lot of docs, especially young docs today, have an issue with that. They don't feel like they're getting their best deal, or that some of them may even feel like there's nothing to negotiate, that it's sort of take it or leave it. And hopefully after today, we'll gain some insights that maybe that's not the case. So let me tell you about both Ethan and Erica, and then we'll bring them on. So Ethan Nkana is the founder of Rocky Mountain Physician Agency. He began his hospital administration journey as a human resources intern after earning a bachelor's degree in business administration and public relations. Over the following decade, Ethan would grow his skill set to include leadership roles in hospital finance, physician contracting and compensation, hospital operations, and healthcare strategy. This extensive training and expertise is underpinned by Ethan's legal and business training. He had got his Juris Doctor's JD and his Master's in Business Administration MBA from the University of Dayton. So he, like me, is a JD MBA. So that's great. Dr. Erica Mathieu, I'll give you some highlights from her bio. And of course, we'll link to both of their bios, or in Erica's case, her LinkedIn. She's a proud graduate of the Ohio State University College of Medicine, which will make my business partner, Jason Odell, proud. We can see that on behind her. She also went to, went to the Ohio State University for both undergrad and to get her MD. She currently has the position of Chief Medical Officer with Primary Health Solutions, and she can tell us a little bit about that. And prior to that, she was a family practice at a group in Dayton, Ohio. So with that, Ethan and Erica, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us, David.
Thank you.
Excellent. So the way we're going to do this is to make it organized. Whenever I have 2 people, I'd like to be kind of organized in how we go at it. Of course, either of you can chime in as we go through this, but I'm going to start with Ethan with some questions specifically for you, and then we'll kind of turn the mic to Dr. Mathieu and go through some questions from her perspective, and I'll certainly want your input on there, and then we'll kind of wrap with back to Ethan. Okay, so let's start with you, Ethan. You're playing the role, and I didn't make this clear in the bio, but you can talk about it with your agency. You're playing the role of kind of a physician agent, and people think of that, when think of in entertainment or sports, et cetera, but they haven't really thought of it probably for physicians before. So why would a physician need an agent? What's the need there?
Yeah, I think the primary reason that doctors need agents and representation in contract negotiations, and really the premise for the business, is that doctors make a ton of money, not that different from professional athletes. But when professional athletes go pro, they hire an agent to negotiate their contracts for them, make sure they get the best deal, the best terms. But doctors are kind of left on their own to figure it out, find a lawyer who does it, and then hope that they get a good deal with their employer. And so we've really focused on bringing value to the doctors, as opposed to like billing doctors hourly or in 6-minute increments. Our focus is on helping make doctors more money. And if we cannot do that, we don't get paid.
Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, obviously, I think there are probably docs listening to this say, hey, I don't make the money of a quarterback or, NBA players making 25, 35, $45 million a year. But still, compared to the average US household, their income is quite high. Even in the NFL, and I happen to know, fair amount of people who played, et cetera, some from the Ohio State University, some not. But, the kind of the rank and file there don't make that much more money than physicians. I mean, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, could be $1 million a year, et cetera, but they're still always represented
Mhm.
by agents. So I think that point is a good one. Now, you mentioned healthcare attorney. You have a JD, so do I. Um, why isn't this something a healthcare attorney would do normally, or is there something different that you're doing or that you're proposing that docs consider that goes beyond, let's say, a healthcare attorney just looking at a contract and sort of giving you their 2 cents? So tell me how this is a little different than what a healthcare attorney might do.
Yeah, great question. I think the main difference is how we get paid and what we focus on. So while we're going to do a comprehensive review and analysis of the doctor's contract, help them make sure that the terms of their employment are fair and competitive for where they are, but at the highest level, what we're trying to do is maximize our doctor's compensation. And I believe that everything we do in life comes back to incentives. And so we built our incentive structure, our compensation
Incentives.
structure, such that it's tied to the doctor's compensation. So there's no question about like, hey, what is Ethan motivated to spend 5 hours reviewing a contract? No, I'm motivated to help you make as much money as possible. That could take 5 hours, it could take 10 hours, but our focus is on making the doctors more money. And whereas I think a traditional attorney, whether they make the doctor more money or not, they're going to get their billed hours paid out, right? I get a bill from my attorney when I send a text message. So, like, it's expensive, but the work that I do is strictly value based. So we want doctors to make a bunch of money, and in turn, we'll share some of those spoils.
So it sounds like it's a different business model, first of all, in terms of aligning yourself with the client in terms of the fee structure. Um, and then and you can tell me because you've seen this, as a hospital administrator and also working in HR. I think there's a fair amount of physicians, and I kind of talked about this at the get go. And Eric, I certainly, when we get to you, want your input on this. But especially younger docs, maybe coming out of fellowship or residency, what have you, and they say there's nothing really to negotiate, right? I mean, I just need an attorney to just tell me what it says, essentially, and that's it. Then I'm going to sign it, because I don't think that there's, um, in some ways they believe potentially that you can't get me any more money. So, tell me about that mindset, and does it apply in certain cases, in certain circumstances? Does it not apply in others, or can you say across the board that that's not true with the proper approach to it?
Yeah, I would love to loop Dr. Matthew in on this one because I think
Okay, let's
there's
do
some
that.
things that I don't fully understand about why this happened. So, for my part as a hospital executive, well, for 100% certain, I told first time attendings it's a standard contract. It can't be changed.
So you
Just
told them
sign.
that. Okay.
Absolutely, of course I
Okay.
did.
Okay.
That's how we saved money because those doctors wouldn't negotiate, not knowing that there's a cushion that they could ask for more, and we could give them more without having to go to legal for approval. But
Interesting.
when we tell doctors it's a standard contract, they usually just said, "Okay, well, I guess I'll sign it." And the thing that and this is where I'd love to know what Dr. Matthew thinks, but the idea that I've been exploring recently is like, do doctors are they conditioned to do exactly as they're told? Because all the way through training, we have the senior doctors and attendings and chief residents who tell us exactly what to do and how to do it. And then coming out of training, I think is the first time a doctor gets to say, like, this is what I want and what's important to me in my practice. And I think it's a little bit of a shock to kind of come out of that mindset and now say, hey, I deserve better. Dr. Matthew, what's your experience or observation?
Absolutely. I completely agree with kind of that assessment, Ethan. You know, re- when you're a medical student, you're paying to work in essence. You're not being paid to do the work. And your schedule might say 6 a.m. till 3 p.m. But the truth is, and anyone who, whether you're a physician or not, if you've ever dated a physician, you know that the answer, or you're married to one like my husband, the answer to that question is you're done when I say you're done is
Hmm.
the answer. So thinking about something such as how much am I going to be paid when you go to residency, that's handed to you. That's posted clearly on residency websites. This is what you're being paid. You got the position, and you leave when you are told to leave. You show up when you're told to show up. It doesn't matter. And now, like you said, this is the first time that you've been in the driver's seat at all, and it makes sense that we'd be a little bit hesitant as a group to not take people, I guess, at their word when they say, this is what we can offer you. This is all we've got. Well, that's a lot of money compared to what I made as a resident. So sounds fantastic.
Right. That yeah. It's not only the training that's coming out, which I think is an important point, but it's also more money than they've been paid in the past. So it's not
Yeah.
like they're used to like negotiating, six-figure salaries. But I want to drill down into one point that you said, Ethan, because I really want people to hear this. And I think this gets to the fact of your experience and why you're able to do what you're doing today. But you said that when you were on the hospital side, that when dealing with first year docs coming in, that there was a cushion that, let's just say 10%. I don't know, you could give us an idea of it is, but we're going to pay this doc normally 250, that if we could go to 275 without even having to go to legal, meaning there was already built in some acknowledgement that that could be negotiated if they press back. Did I hear that right? And is that your experience?
Absolutely, 100%. And in your last question, you also asked about, can first time attendings even move the mark in negotiations? And the answer is a resounding yes. So here's where the strategy of this comes into play. If I'm a first time attending and I only have one offer, how confident am I going to be in pushing back on the
Right.
numbers that they put in front of me, right? Like, if that's my big job that I've been working towards, and I don't want to do anything that might risk that job and my livelihood. So what I encourage doctors to do, and Dr. Matthew did this in her experience as an attending, is get multiple job offers that you'd be willing to accept. And now you can say, okay, I really like offer A, but maybe offer B doesn't quite hit the mark on clinical support or my schedule. And so you then have confidence to have a little more of a voice in the conversation. So plastic surgery, we increase an offer first time attending by 50,000. Family medicine, we increase a first time attendings offer by 40,000. And this is just by asking. So
And let me just drill down on that for a second. So
mhm,
I agree totally with your point. It always makes sense, just market economics. If you have, more than one offer, whether it's to sell your practice, we've done a lot of talks about M&A in this podcast, or any kind of, selling your home, right? So um, uh, in those in those examples you just said, a plastic surgeon, there was a family practice. Did they have multiple offers, or was it still you were able to you know, uh, uh, get some better terms, even when we're focusing on one?
it happens in both. But I will say that our success rate is lower when the doctor has one offer.
Yeah, makes
I've
sense.
had some doctors come back twice even. So they'll ask, they'll get told no, and they'll come back again and say, "Look, I really want to join, but I have this other offer." And so really that's what gives doctors the what's called leverage in the conversation. But what I often hear is like doctors think, "Well, I'm a really good doctor. They really want me, so I have leverage." Like, that's not leverage. Leverage is the ability to walk away from the offer with an equally satisfying option.
Interesting. I like that. That's very insightful. So a couple more questions, Ethan, before we go back to Erica. So do you see that, in my mind, there's kind of three scenarios, and you could correct me on that, but whether it's a doc coming out or moving, laterally, they're either going to be negotiating with or against, a large institution that, could be in a hospital, could be a health system, could be academics, et cetera, where they're going to become a W-2 employee, right? There is a situation where they're joining a private practice where they are, potentially going to become a partner in a couple of years. So, it's a different scenario, different kind of environment they're coming into that situation. And then you've got existing docs who maybe are then up for partnership or moving across at a partnership level from one private practice to another, right? So to my mind, there's like, one against a larger institution, one to, a group that could be a large group, and then where you're coming in early, and then one you're kind of coming across as a partner, say moving to a new a state, but you're 10 years in practice, and you're going to join another private practice. How are those different in your mind? Meaning, or are they all? Do you approach them all the same? What is? Are there any nuances depending on the situation, based on those three scenarios?
Yeah, there's an incredible amount of nuance, and I won't bore your audience with all of it, but I often say that the most important thing to consider is when you're in private practice, you're probably doing a lot more than taking care of patients. You're probably doing hiring and firing. You're probably doing contracting with insurance payers. Um, there's a lot of other, you have to grow your business, marketing. There's all of these other things that are incumbent in that business, which can impact your lifestyle. Now, on the large hospital health system side, you have some of those things taken care of for you. So we're negotiating on different points. Now we're talking about support. Now we're talking about making sure that my pay is adequate for the context in which I'm giving and providing care. So I'm thinking a little bit differently about my doctor's priorities and preferences and what they want in their practice. So, Dr. Mathieu could tell you one of the first things we do is sit down to really prioritize what's important to the doctor. And then we want the employment opportunities that we identify to reflect those priorities. So if a doctor says, I want to practice in, let's just say a federally qualified health system, FQHC, you don't want to then bring them private practice opportunities because those are completely incompatible, not just from your daily life, but from your values and how you give care. And so I always approach it from the perspective of what matters most to my doctor. And the levers that I pull are different, but the language is all the same. The context is the same, and the players are all the same, just sitting in different context.
So one more question before we get to Erica. So follow up on that, which is that I've heard, and I don't know who I heard this from. It might have been from a fellow doc, et cetera. I don't even think it was on the podcast, but they had an opinion about, and I can't even remember what the opinion was. I think it was that when you're taking a new job or considering it, don't or try not to negotiate with a doc on the other side. Meaning you're going to come to the new practice. Don't be negotiating with one of your potential new partners, right?
Interesting. Okay.
Find ideally HR if it's big enough, or the CEO or the CFO, someone who's not a fellow physician who may, have other issues, emotions about bringing in a doc, and in terms of, oh, I didn't get paid that when I was that age, or whatever the issue is, that it's a little tougher to have that kind of business mindset when it's also the doc who kind of took you out to dinner and recruited you to the practice, who you're going to be, in the OR with, that kind of thing. Better to do it with a business person that, your relationship will almost always be business. Even if you join that practice, CEO, you might become friendly with them, but it's not going to be like one of your fellow docs where you're
Sure.
consulting on cases. Have
Huh.
does that seem reasonable to you? Is that something you have thought about yourself, or tell me about that that thought?
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. I had not considered that myself. The rule of thumb that I use is don't negotiate with people who cannot make a decision.
Mhm.
So I often think about like some of, depending on the hierarchy in the organization. That's a really interesting. I want to think on that because that's a
Yeah.
really interesting perspective. I would throw my rule of thumb into the ring as well, which is, if you're going to negotiate, don't do it with the recruiter. Don't do it with, the first person you got a phone call from. Do it with the people who have the power and influence in the organization to make that change.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, he wasn't, and I'm trying to even think who it was, a client of mine, but it made sense to me. But some circumstances there isn't any other opportunity. It might be a small practice where there's a practice manager, but the practice manager is not the one making the deal.
Exactly.
The larger the practice, the larger the institution, obviously you're going to deal with a business person.
That concludes part 1 of our 2-part podcast with Ethan Nkana and Erica Mathieu. We will continue the conversation in part 2, which will be aired on May 16th. Thank you for joining us. The Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast is brought to you by OJM Group, a multidisciplinary wealth management firm dedicated to helping physicians build and preserve their wealth while reducing taxes. Podcast listeners can get a free copy of our flagship book, Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician. Simply scan the QR code or text WPPOD to 844-418-1212 to request your free print copy or ebook download. Be sure to join David for the next episode of the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast. It's important to note that this content is for informational purposes only and does not represent personalized investment advice, as the information may not be suitable for your personal circumstances. Please contact your investment advisor before implementing any of the strategies discussed.